All right, we're live. Hello, everyone.
Yay!
Welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dots. Today on the show, I have Tara Z. Manicsic. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. So Tara,
So very happy to be here.
I'm pumped because I have joked many times that you are like the most interesting person in tech, because it seems like every time I mention anything, like I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm working on like a part of my kitchen. You're like, oh yeah, back when I was a plumber. And so you kind of have like this incredibly diverse background in terms of what you've done for jobs, what you've done for work. So I guess to start, maybe we can tee it off with where you are now. What's your current role?
I am at this company called Netlify. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Nice to meet you, by the way. And I am on the DX team, mostly working with Angular and then a bunch of really fun internal products like Jamstack Explorers. So that's where I currently am.
Absolutely. And so this, to me, this is the perfect show for you because I feel like, sorry, hold on. Let me just take a second to congratulate myself on the brilliance of
I was going to say, my name is Jason. I made this show and it's perfect. Let me tell you more.
So let me qualify that. What I mean by this is that this show is actually, it's the result of a conversation that you and I had, which was, we were talking about how the skills that we build when we work in different jobs translate so well into tech in really unexpected ways. And so in the past, you and I have both had non-traditional, like you don't have a CS degree, right?
I do.
You do? Oh my God, you get more and more interesting. Okay. All right. Well, maybe I should let you tell your own story then.
Isn't that ridiculous though? I mean, it's funny because it's actually from the Harvard Extension School.
Okay.
And I got it because I'm a business school dropout. I tried to go to business school. I failed so miserably that because I was like, oh, these business classes aren't fun. I'm just going to go to my math classes and ceramics and classical guitar classes. And they're like, yeah, you can't do that. And I was like, oh. So I dropped out of there and then ended up working at Harvard. And so they have this TAP program, tuition assistance program. So you can take courses for $20 at their extension school as long as you can like get in. And I just kept being like, I started with there's like a physical and screen-based computing class that was actually through MIT, but we were allowed to take it. And I liked it so much. They used processing with Java. It was when processing was like kind of new-ish, so it was only used with Java. And so I was like, oh, I want to be better at making silly designs. I should learn Java. And so that's how I learned Java. and, and from there, they were like, well, you could be better at this if you learn data structures. And I was like, okay, in order to make my really stupid, silly electronics video games, I am going to continue to learn data structures. And it just went from there. And eventually I had a CS degree.
Jeez. Yeah. Okay. Every time we talk, I learn something new. But so what are some of the other jobs that you've held in addition to being a coder?
So I was actually looking back and I haven't had a break from okay. So I've started working in 1995 and the longest break I've ever had without a job was the maternity leave that I took about 2 years ago. So, and sometimes I've like overlapped jobs. And it's funny because thinking about like my first real office job was when sounds so ridiculous, when I was 12 years old. Because you can't work until you're 14
Right.
in Ohio, but I don't know, is that everywhere?
No, I think it's different from state to state.
Okay. But I had a taste of it because I had started my own wagon business, obviously. Which first which I took pumpkin rolls around to business districts and sold them inside of the little, where it's like a brick long building and there's like 18 businesses in there. So I did that. And so, did door-to-door pumpkin roll sales as one does when they're that old. And then I painted curbs and stuff. And this was all because I wanted to buy a flute.
Okay.
So at that point I was just like learned, okay, I need money to get things. Therefore, I like sell goods. And then from there, I was just like, this isn't enough. I need more money.
I could have two flutes.
Exactly. One for each nostril. And so, but then, so my grandmother was like, well, come to Barberland Foods and you can be my payroll assistant. You really like math. So you can do payroll for everybody. And the funniest thing is like, I learned really good people skills there because my grandma is such a little schmoozer. She used to be, so she did a lot of office management work for a while. And then when she retired, she became a bartender at the VFW, as grandmas do. And so she was like, the thing that you have to understand is people just want you to listen to them. If you listen to them and you genuinely find something to care about, like of them, then they'll warm up to you faster and they'll give you the better benefit of the doubt. And it's funny because she's known as being quite a like cold, sarcastic woman. And she was doing that to her own advantage. But when I learned that, I learned it as such a like real genuine trait that I really have, when I meet people, I want to hear more about them. And then I just like, even if they're people that aren't the most likable people, I always try to find at least one thing that I find either like very intriguing or it's something I like about them, and always try to keep that in mind at the forefront, which has helped me a lot in the tech industry.
I can imagine. Well, so that's fascinating. So that was like, that takes us up to what, you were 13?
Yep. So this is a 5-hour episode, right?
But so along the way, you started out, you had, your pumpkin roll business. You worked doing the books, and then you ended up at some point doing, like, you were driving a forklift, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's actually like 13 years later, or is that right? Maybe like 12 or something. So I've had a lot of retail experience, and through a lot of different companies, like looking through the list, it's been like a lot of like food and retail things. I worked at Subway, Target, Texas Roadhouse, Panera Bread, Chipotle, Pacific Sunwear, Urban Outfitters, and Biggs. Biggs is the one where I was doing the forklift because I was working in the garden center.
Okay.
So I would get all of the pallets back and forth of mulch and stone and everything. But I think like one of the things that I learned the most from those jobs that has helped me a lot is like from the retail jobs in particular, is that customer service and common sense go hand in hand. And I think that you just have to have, the only emotion that you should have in customer service is empathy. Because if you get angry, if you just say, if you feel attacked, if you get defensive, that's going to take you nowhere fast. And it's funny, I think like, especially with working with open source software, that has really helped me a ton, because it's so easy for me to get defensive about my code. But when somebody is saying like, this isn't working for me, and why did you write it this way? And I have to remember how frustrated I get when I use libraries and I say, why did they do it this way? This doesn't work. This API is it's bonkers, it's backwards, whatever. And so when I see things coming my way, I know I don't want an author of a plugin to be like, I'm not going to help you because, you're a jerk. Or, there's it's like, I don't want to be a jerk, and I don't want to be a jerk to you. And there's been multiple times, especially in issues and stuff, where people are like, your product sucks. This is stupid. What are you doing? This is awful. And so I just come back and I think about it, and I try keep my best to take myself out of that situation. Like I did when I was doing Target returns, and they're like, your stupid store said that I had to bring this back. And I'm like, okay, I see. This is really frustrating because you need this thing to work. And, I'm here one-on-one with you. How can we make this work? And just drop all that drama part of it to see if we can get to a solution. And that, writing back to people's angry issues like that, I've had so many times where people come back and they go, oh, I was really upset. Sorry for the things that I said. Yeah, here's my problem. Here's the code. What can we do?
Yeah.
But that's hard. There's a lot of emotion in code we write.
And like what you're talking about too, it kind of reminds me of they say that the laws of thermodynamics, like every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? What I've found though is that in human interactions, that's not true. Human interactions tend to mirror each other, which is why when somebody comes at you hard and you get defensive, if you go back, it will get really contentious. But if somebody comes at you hard and you don't, you just let the anger wash over you and you just respond as measured as you can, and nothing comes back. So it's really hard for them to stay mad. It's really hard. You know what I mean? It's that whole idea of it's so hard to attack somebody who's peaceful, peaceful resistance kind of thing. So if somebody's coming at you, and you just say, I understand and I want to help.
No, you don't know the person who's coming at you. Sorry, I think I had a little delay.
You're fine. You're back.
Okay, sorry. Am I here? So I was just going to say that I think we talk about this, or we don't talk about this enough, but just understanding that our jobs aren't our whole lives. And so when people come at you angry, you don't know where they're coming from. And so I did AmeriCorps, National Civilian Community Corps, and we did Katrina disaster relief. So right after all the floods, we went down and we gutted houses, and worked at different volunteer bases, and basically just entrenched ourselves in these areas that were just demolished. Mm-hmm. And it was hard because you would get so desensitized from living in these areas. It was hard to remember what people were going through. So we would have I remember having a situation where I was in one of the volunteer camps, and this guy came in and he was just went off on us because our truck was parked in front of his driveway. And we didn't even know anybody was there. So we were just huh? And he was screaming. And I don't do well with people screaming. But at first we were all just what? How dare you? Sorry, that's my dog. But then you realize oh yeah, this guy doesn't have a place to live anymore. He's coming home to his house and he can't even get on the driveway now. And so I think about that kind of mindset when, people come at you already at a level 10. Mm-hmm. And you're just dude, all it was is that, that part of the module needed installed. Why are you yelling already? And then you're just oh yeah, your boss is yelling at you to get this done immediately, and their boss is yelling at them. And there's a whole trickle down, and you just know that yelling is happening and you should be yelling too. It's like,
well, and I also think like in open source, there's this tendency where like in the early days of open source, it's really fun because when you're a maintainer, everybody who's coming to your library they're voluntarily there. They want to try something out. They're there to learn and to like be part of a community. Later, as something gets popular, like, you know, if you're a Webpack maintainer right now, most of the people in the Webpack issues, they're not there because they wanted to learn Webpack. They're there because they inherited a project and they're on a deadline and something is broken and they don't understand it and they didn't write this code to begin with. And they're furious that they have to deal with this problem because they don't feel like it should be their problem. And unfortunately, you as the maintainer are the person standing right in front of them when they're having this realization. And I think, yeah, exactly. I mean, I love that way of framing it though, because if you think about the fact that people don't exist in a vacuum, you know, if you assume that people exist when they're outside of your field of view, they've got whole stories, they've got whole lives going on. And the thing that's happening to you right now has very little to do with you if this isn't somebody you know.
Exactly. And it's funny because, you know, like they say, software is easy, people are hard. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot that I learned from getting my CS degree is, and so I was really lucky. My mom taught electronics at the local community college. And so when I would get out of school, I would go to her electronics lab and just fiddle around with breadboards and stuff. So I got taught the mindset of logical thinking, thanks to that really analog procedure of like, this thing is feeding this thing and it can only get these instructions. It can only be on or off, and where is that on or off going, and who is it telling us what's on and off. So I was really lucky to have that kind of like logical mindset pretty early on. And then that got really reinforced once I started going through all my CS courses. And it's kind of like, which I think you can learn from not even just classes, but doing development work in general. Mm-hmm. But I definitely saw when the switch flipped, you know, when you're making dinner after coding something out and you're like, pot, turn, boil, water, boil. When water boils, pasta. And it's like, what's happened to my brain? And it's just like, I remember just thinking of like my dog's different methods. And I was just like, oh, what's happening? But that is such that's a factor in a development job. The human communication that has to go to make a functioning team and a functioning product is something that like, you don't have to have 38 jobs like I have had. But it definitely helps to have such a mixture of one, like working or dealing with both people that you need to manage, people that are on all people that you need to manage, people that are on your team, and people that are managing you. Mm-hmm. And I think I learned a ton from the different kinds of jobs I had and the different responsibilities I had in each of those jobs.
So I'm going to make one quick comment, which is that when you're talking about your like writing the code for making pasta, the Italians in chat are very grateful that you said when water, then pasta. Which I also, well done. But another question. So there was a question earlier. You talked about getting your CS degree and when you were learning data structures. And Pranav asks, how was your experience learning data structures? And like, what of that do you find has been important in your roles or in your career, I guess?
It's funny because it was definitely a lot of, you know, now it wasn't that long ago that I went to school, but now they have so many hilarious resources like bubble sort square dancing videos and like,
I saw that one.
Have you seen those? And I'm like, oh yeah, that would make, I had a really great teacher. And so he did a lot of things like the whole tearing of the notebook to kind of show you different kinds of ways to like sort That class was by far one of my hardest because I had only done like intro to Java before then. So that like logical mindset wasn't completely ingrained in me. It's funny to think how I use it now because I'm not, anytime I need to do a data structure or some kind of like principle along those lines, I go back to reference constantly. So there's nothing in my head that I'm this like, oh, well, it's obviously this because of that. That's Cassidy. Cassidy's the one that does that.
It's Cassidy Williams that we're referring to.
Yes, obviously. But I do have that mindset though of like, yeah, we're setting, we have to have these different markers to understand what is the best process to make this faster. And like we were talking about this in on Remotely Interesting, a podcast we do. This weird guy Jason's on there too. And we talked about rendering in this one episode. And it's funny because in everything we have these markers. So like we have time to first contentful paint and like time, like we're marking everything so that we have a system to understand how it's going to be better for our users. And so it's more that I'm not bringing any data structures with me on a daily basis, but it's more that mindset of like, there is an algorithm to figure out how to make this best for our users. And that mentality has definitely stuck through and through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The rest of that class though.
I mean, I don't have a CS degree, but what I have found about things like algorithms, data structures, that type of study is I very rarely am looking at that information and saying, that's exactly what I'm going to do to solve this problem. But what I found is that having that around in the back of my mind, when I look at a problem, I at least have a list of things to like thumb through and go, is that kind of like this? Is that kind of like this? And then I can go, I at least know what to Google, right? And I think that's been probably the most beneficial part of any of that more academic learning for me has been it gives me vocabulary that lets me Google more effectively.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, it's hilarious to me when I try to tell people just how much Googling is part of our job. Like, and it's funny because that's another one that I've learned through so many different jobs is to ask for help. Like not just like searching things on the web, but it's like, it takes a lot of humility to one, admit you did something wrong, and then on top of it, ask for help. But it's totally clutch. Like nobody's perfect. And if you are, turns out you're wrong. So, but it's definitely like through the years, I've definitely had to like remind myself that it's just like, okay, even about things that don't have like a specific right answer, just knowing that you may think this is the best way to go about doing something, but you're not working in a silo. So you have to, like, I remember the first time the VP of development experience at Netlify, Sarah Drasner, said to disagree and commit. I just remember being like, oh, what? And then it's just like, oh yeah, because team, like company, business. It's like, yeah, it makes sense. Like you've got to do that in your daily life. I've also been in a relationship for like, too long, 12 years or something. 14. And I mean, at least 3/4 of the relationship is disagree and commit. So you learn from everywhere in your life.
Yeah. Well, and actually I think that's kind of so you mentioned one thing that I think is really hard to start, because especially when you're new in your career, the idea of admitting that you don't know something, that can feel like it's going to be the giveaway that gets you like thrown out. You know, it's like, oh, they're going to realize that I don't know what I'm doing. For you, how was that experience, and like what experiences did you have that helped you overcome that fear of saying like, hey, I don't know how to do this. Who can help me?
I've always liked to learn, and having the having the craving to learn has overcompensated that whole pride thing.
Mm.
But it was definitely something that I learned. I realized that I made a better uh, team member in in the dev world because I had learned a lot so much from all the other jobs that I've been on. Like, I didn't know how to like, um, so I like renovated a house recently, and like I didn't know the proper way to like cut and install drywall, how to do plumbing, how the different angles matter if you actually want your poop to go down. And and so it's definitely a lot of being like, there's something like I had the overseer of doing a lot of the construction work. I worked with Habitat for Humanity for a little while, and we actually built houses on the mall in DC.
Okay.
So it was like this really cool event where they had 12 houses, and we built them on the mall, and then they got on trucks and moved them out to different places around like Anacostia and the areas.
Oh, cool.
That was so cool. And the foreman on the project was so mean. And you don't really expect it for like these programs that are like, let's all work together. And he just expected you to know everything.
Okay.
And so we would be putting things together, and I'm like, I don't know how to do this. But the last thing you want to go is like go up to the bully and be like, I'm dumb. Because he just was like, what do
Yeah.
you mean you don't know how to frame a house? And I'm like, I don't know. I also had like 16 Jello shots last night. So let's work together. But I feel like when you have that experience of just like, okay, this is the boss, right? Like the boss in a video game, but like his defense is like being a jerk to you. And then how you're gonna, or like his attack is being a jerk to you. And then your defense is just like taking it and knowing that he doesn't know anything about you. He can't really change your life in any horrible way. So the only thing that can happen here is that I can just let those things slide off me and learn what I need to learn.
Hmm.
And that's an extreme situation. Like, hopefully, not a lot of people are like having insults thrown at them as they're trying to hammer 2x4s together. But it made me even be better at like the first dev job I had. I knew what I was doing, but I had always worked with. I was like switching to do more back end work. And I was also unfamiliar with infrastructure. And so it would look like I knew what I was doing. So my managers would be like, yeah, that's right. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, it looks like I know what I'm doing, but I don't. So explain this to me on this section, and this section is if I don't know what I'm doing. And
Right.
I felt like that was a really good thing that I'm glad I had in my toolbox, to even say like, yeah, sure, you think I'm doing it right, but I'm not. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, because that's hard. It's hard, one, to just say you don't know what you're doing, and especially when you're new and you're like, they just brought me on,
Hmm.
like they could get rid of me if they wanted. But it's really good to remember. I'm going to take a breath and stop talking after this point. Um, it's good to remember with both, like many things in life, but development and definitely speaking, like doing talks, especially technical talks. People don't want to see you fail. Like 97.63 people don't want to see you fail. It's extremely awkward as an audience member. It's very, it's not what managers want to see. So they're rooting for you when it comes down to it. So if they can find a way to help you succeed as a manager, the audience can't. If they can find a way to help you succeed as one of their employees, that's what they want to do. So if you can
Hmm.
give them what they need, let them know what you need to succeed,
Right.
like it's making everybody happier. Nobody wants to see you fail. So
Yeah. Well,
Don't.
and really, like if somebody hired you, it's going to look really bad on them if the person they hired is like not equipped to do the job. So it's in their, like, even just selfishly, it's in your manager, your employer's best interest to train you. So,
Exactly.
you know,
And if they do want to see you fail, you don't want to work there.
yeah, fair enough, right? But so we've been kind of talking like this is a lot of abstract stuff that I think is really really helpful. But for a lot of folks watching this stream, they're in free code camp, and a lot of those folks are looking for their first role. So when you are like, I know that you do a decent amount of mentorship. I know that you work with a lot of communities. You've been in the industry for a while, so I mean, I have a hard time remembering how I got my first role outside of like I did a thing and then I had a job. But what advice do you have? Like, the industry is flooded right now. There are a lot of people looking for their first job. There's also a little bit of constriction due to the pandemic. Companies are looking for, it seems like everybody's only hiring senior devs, or they're saying entry level, but they're putting 3 years experience into the job description. So for someone who's looking for that first break, for someone who is looking to stand out in a large sea of applicants for a very limited number of entry level roles, what advice do you have that can help somebody, you know, get that first chance?
I think the biggest thing is people are afraid to put their work on Git, to have it somewhere online, because they're like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, I think, so I don't want to like have evidence online that I did something wrong. But like, if you look at Jason's old code, he did tons of things wrong.
Absolutely.
And Jason's brilliant. So
well,
it's like, case study right there. But I think it's especially for people who are, I work with a lot of women in tech organizations, and just like actual women who are doing development. And especially when I started at the branch of Women Who Code in Cincinnati. And the biggest thing that I got was a lot of people re-entering the field. And it's daunting to go in and talk to people who are also looking at applicants that are coming straight out of CS courses, and they're young, and they've been working with computers since they were 3 months old. And it's like, well, I've been out of the industry, do I know what I'm doing? And one of your kindest audiences are the people who aren't paying you. So especially right now, when brick and mortars are really hurting, and there's an opportunity for a lot of companies to go online, but they can't afford it. They need that help. Look into those projects, even if it's like working with one person from your community and saying, okay, I'm going to have to take the knowledge that I've learned through boot camps, through doing things on my own, and put that into an actual product. Because one, you're going to learn so much from that. Not only just how hard customers are to work with, but also like, how do you want to set up your infrastructure? How are you going to have it so that people can use it on mobile? Like, there are so many things that you're going to learn from just doing one actual small project. Like, I do a side project with I cannot get this acronym right, but it's basically the Asian American Association of Cincinnati. And so we've put a site together, actually using like Gatsby and Netlify and Strappy, to basically get all of these different Asian business owners onto one site. It's asianaddy.com. And that way, it's hard for restaurants right now to just like, you're not going to walk by a restaurant and be like, oh, I'm going to go in there and eat, because we're all inside in front of our TVs watching Queen's Gambit. And so like, this gives them a way to be in front of an audience, all in one central location, but I'm doing it for free. But I'm learning so much. Sure. And then you have an actual physical working thing that you can show employers. So if you're more of an introvert, or like me, you hate saying anything good about yourself to anybody but yourself, then it's nice because you can just let your work speak for you. And I find it really rewarding because you also, if you can find a nonprofit like that, you get to work with a team. But also, if you're doing it by yourself just to help out a company, one, it's great. You help out somebody in your neighborhood or a small business. And two, you can make all the decisions yourself, which is also really fun.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that does when you work with nonprofits or groups like that is you start building a network. Because I know, like for me, I got my first job in Montana, and in Montana there are no jobs. Like it's there are now, I guess, but at the time there just wasn't a lot of technology companies there, and I hadn't been introduced to the idea of remote work. So I was like, okay, well, I got to find a job in Missoula, Montana. That's my option. And the only way that I was able to do that was by hanging out at a developers meetup and finding people who were working at different companies. And one of them got a lead on a client, but they didn't have time, so they passed it to me, and that was my first paying client. So those types of jobs are really like it, that. Now that's on my resume, or it was on my resume at the time. You know, it was like now I've got a real paying client. Look, I'm a professional, and I'm not looking for my first break. I'm looking for my second job. And it changed the whole narrative. It changed the discussion all the way from like, hey, please give me my first break to, hey, I've been doing this professionally. I'm looking for something new. And it immediately changed the way that things worked. And that was all due to a network. So I think like getting involved in those projects, finding ways where you can work with other people in the industry just long enough to be on a first name basis with them. You know, like have like that idea of friends in high places. It's not what you know, it's who you know. All those things are cliches for a reason. They're cliches because they work. And so, you know, and now that everything's remote, right? Like, you know, how do you feel that's changed for you? How has your social network changed in the age of like remote everything?
Well, it's funny because I also got my first tech job out of school through a meetup. And that was like the big thing to me was I just kept finding things that I liked to do. And so this company was they had a meetup, and I was like kind of trying to choose between if I wanted to work more with like Ruby on Rails and stuff, or go into the Node side of things. And so there was a Tessel meetup. So Tessel is an open source microcontroller library, and it's all run on Node. And I love just like tinkering around with electronics still. Like soldering is one of my favorite pastimes because of the fumes. And so we went into this meetup, and I didn't know anybody there. And so I just kind of talked to people, and one person I just like hit it off with, he had a 40 in a brown bag, and I was like, is that King Cobra? And he was like, how did you know that? And I was like, no. But then he was like he was like, oh, here's my card. And I was like, oh, pragmatic, or he was like a software craftsman. And I was like, oh, like pragmatic programmer, which is a really great book. And then he was like, are you looking for a job? And I was like, oh yeah, I am. And I ended up working for this platform as a service company, and I loved everybody there. And it was like, you can't do that now. Like it's hard to get, you can't go in person and just chat about whatever's going on. But that's kind of really great for introverts, because now there are different ways to communicate. And virtual tech conferences, a lot of them are free right now. Like JamStatConf was all free. And there are different like networking things that you can do inside there. But also people are more inclined to be online and in front of their computers. So one of the biggest things that I always push people to do who are coming back into the industry is to email any contact in a department that they were interested in the company. Like just shoot out a cold email, just try. Because job descriptions and job listings are horrible. Like Netlify's, I highly recommend checking those out if like you want to see what it should look like. Obviously I'm super biased, but it's like, I remember when I first started looking for jobs, it would be like, oh, you should know you should know every single backend language would be listed. And I'm just like, what? Why? And it's because whoever was in that department to make the job description was like, oh, software languages. Okay, I'll list those. Okay, what else? Like, and so there's so much there like that doesn't make sense. So I think especially like in these times where nobody's really meeting up and talking, you have there could be a slight advantage to being able to reach out to people, and it's like it makes sense even to the people you're reaching out to, like, oh yeah, I can't see this person in person. So communicating online, you can ask questions, and then you don't have that pressure of like one-on-one being like, oh, what is job? You know, you can reread and definitely proofread everything that you send out. And that's a really nice thing because it lets you really think about things through before words out your mouth are bad.
I'm laughing, but that is excellent advice. Like, I really do think that, you know, having more spaces being created where people can be slow and be considered and not necessarily have to immediately rapid fire think on your feet to respond, because that is a whole different skill set that you do have to practice, and something that not all of us are ever going to be comfortable with. But so I have a couple questions from the chat. One, have you worked with software testing professionally? Like, I'm not sure if that question is directly at like, were you a test engineer, or like, have you written tests as an engineer? I think the answer will be the way that answer goes is slightly different based on context, but I'll let you take it whichever way you want.
Yes, to all of those. But because I worked at I never had the role.
Stop. Yes. Next question.
Tempted to. I was really tempted to. Yes. No. So I because like the platform as a service that I worked for, we were pretty small. I was like the besides the manager, like the third engineer hired on, and so we were touching everything. So definitely wrote a lot of tests. And I actually like test writing. I tend to make like once I switched over to more developer, what's the one that's not developer experience? I don't know. I had to make a lot of demos.
DevRel? Is that what you're thinking?
DevRel. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. So when I switched over to that, I had to make a lot of demos fast. And so in the beginning, I would write a lot more tests because I enjoyed it. But then that fell to the wayside when it was like, oh, my talk's tomorrow and I need a demo. Not that I ever do that. But then in actual testing, we had to do a lot of that for our product at the platform as a service. So yes.
Another question that I think is very relevant is, we were talking a little bit earlier about just building projects, putting those out in public. And Vivek is asking, will the pet projects help in cracking an interview for a developer role?
100%. Because that's, again, I really liked the company that I was working at. The hiring manager, or like the engineering managers, were really good about having the interview be about like what you know based on talking to you. Mm-hmm. So I did no whiteboarding in that first interview, which is good because anytime I go in front of a whiteboard, I immediately draw funny dinosaurs. But they were like, what is something you learned on a project that you were doing, and tell me the code behind it. And that doesn't, everybody's different, but that didn't feel very daunting to me because it was like, oh my gosh, yeah, when I had to do this thing with this array, and this wasn't the right way to sort through it, so I had to go through this way, and I thought that would work, but then this thing was wrong. And so you're basically like venting about a project that you're working on. But in that, you're able to show that like you could talk through the code that you wrote, and you understood what things were right, what things were wrong, and you've actually coded before.
Yeah.
Like, which sounds ridiculous, but it's a way to know too how frustrated people get on what problems and how much excitement they find in coding. So and what they try to stay, if you're, I've had this before, where you're hiring somebody who's supposed to mostly be working on back end work, and all they want to talk about through the whole interview is the front end stuff, or stuff that is not
right
connected to what you're hiring them for. And not that that's always a downfall, but it says like you're not really as excited about the aspect that we're hiring for.
Well, but that I think is such a good point, because like if we're writing a job description for a very specific role, and you are a great developer who's not interested in that specific role, it's going to work out poorly for both of us, because you're not going to be super passionate about the work we are asking you to do, and you'll instead be trying to do work that is, not what we were hiring for. So it's better, like actually that you reminded me of the way we were interviewing on my team at IBM, where one of the things that we would do is we did a take home work project, and it was like, okay, you've got 2 hours, build a website. And the things that we wanted you to do for the website were like, you could build a front end, you could build the kind of like data business layer of like how you load stuff in, or you could build a back end to store that data. And then we would look at what people focused on, because 2 hours is not enough time to do the whole thing. So we said, do whatever you would do, and then at 2 hours just cut off, and then we'll talk about, what you would do next and all that. And if somebody spent the whole time on the UI, we knew that was where their passion was. If they spent the whole time setting up a backend, we knew that was where their passion was. And you could hear it in the way they talked about it, because you would see like, well, in some, I'd have to figure out how to build the data stuff. And you could tell like, that's not the thing they're comfortable with. It's not the thing they're interested in, but they would just bubble and bubble and bubble about how much fun it was to write this front end. And you're like, perfect. We needed a UI engineer. This is exactly who we should hire. But you can see that in projects too. Like you said, like if somebody is putting out a lot of pet projects, then you get like a really good insight into what they're excited about, what they're building and what they're publishing. That's a window, you're telegraphing as a developer. When you build something, you're sending out a message that this is what I like to build. And so if you've got a bunch of UI projects and you're applying for a UI role, that sends a signal to me as a hiring manager. Oh, this person's doing exactly what we want. I'd like to see more. And like, if we're hiring for juniors, we're not looking for people who are perfect. We're looking for people who are excited, because we're going to teach you the skills, but we can't teach you to be excited about it. Yeah, sorry, you were going to say something.
I was going to say there's a lot of resiliency to be showcased in doing side projects or pet projects. And don't let the lack of an idea make you stumble. Because one thing that we were talking about, I think this was also on Remotely Interesting, and I think you actually brought up this point of almost like every profession, we're copying each other, and we totally do that in tech all the time. And that's one of the best ways to learn. Like when you're playing a musical instrument, you're just playing the same thing that someone's played over and over and over. Mm-hmm. And so, if you want to, try to make a BuzzFeed, make a BuzzFeed. It's showing that you can take a concept and put it onto the screen into actually working data and working files. And so if you don't have an idea, don't worry about it. If you think that your idea is dumb, that's fine. Most ideas we have are dumb. Well, it's just doing something.
Yeah. Well, and realistically speaking, like when you get a job as an engineer, it won't be your idea that you're building. So rebuilding another thing is a great example of like what it's like to work for another company. You're going to get handed a mock-up, you're going to get handed a business goal and told to build something and sent loose to do that. So that, that's not like that is not cheating by any means. That's actually closer to what you would do on the day-to-day than if you were to come up with something completely on your own.
Yeah. And just like, so I know this idea, I said it before, but again, if you go to a small business and you're like, let me make your website for you, it's going to be quite a journey. I'm not going to like sugarcoat it. Like they're going to be so grateful and do and like whatever you like, but that's going to be part of a really great learning process, is like knowing, because this happens on teams constantly where you're like, here, I made this thing that you asked for. And they're like, that's not exactly what I asked for. Change all of it. And you're like, okay, cool. So it's, I mean, I can't stress enough how like trying to find that in your community or small business somewhere, it's like, it'll help you in the long run.
Yeah. Okay. So we have time for probably one more question. And I think there's a really good one because we were just talking about projects. But there's a whole school of thought and a lot of emphasis, especially in technical interviews, on the idea of like the things that you would see in whiteboarding. So leak code, algorithmic, being able to write your own bubble sort by hand and all that kind of stuff. It seems the messaging that's being sent is that doing those types of programming puzzles is going to have more of an advantage when looking for a job versus building projects. Do you agree with that, or kind of what's your take on that?
It's such a loaded question because there are definitely benefits in someone being able to make those mental maps and show it in code. But I lose it in interviews. I forget, like, I remember I had an interview and they were like, what other frameworks are there for Node? And I was like Koa? And they're like, yeah, like those. And I was like, oh, there are other ones. In my GitHub, I have a project made with every single Node framework. Because I found it interesting to try every single one out. But in the interview, I was like, my name's Tara. And
that's what I got.
That's all I had. So, I mean, that in itself is like, whiteboarding stuff can be actually really fun when you're comfortable and you're on a team and like you are just part of like your work day. Like I've definitely done it a lot in jobs that they've already chosen to hire me. But I just think that there are other techniques to glean a lot more from candidates that you will probably not be literally whiteboarding with in their position whatsoever.
Right.
But there are like, there are ways. It's like trying to say that a problem is black and white because it's a cop-out. It's a cop-out to just be like, well, they've been whiteboarding these problems for so long, we're just going to keep doing it. Mm-hmm. If you want a good candidate, put as much effort into getting that candidate as you want them to put into getting your job.
Right.
So try harder, I guess is.
Well, and for the candidates too, like I think, as much as this sucks to say, the algorithm stuff, the training for coding interviews, that is like studying for the SATs. It will help you score better in the technical interview. It will likely have very little impact on your ability to succeed in your job. So make sure that while you're studying for technical interviews, you're also doing real world type of work. And the projects are that real world type of work. So what like my preference, if I was going to give advice, is to spend most of your time building real world projects. And then if you are going into a round of technical interviews, cram on technical interview stuff in the meantime, like for the couple weeks leading up to it. Like don't become an expert at taking tests. That doesn't serve you in the job market. Become an expert at doing the work that the test will get you to. Honestly, there's a lot of pressure on tech companies to revise the way that we're doing technical interviews. And, for example, Netlify, we've dropped like algorithmic whiteboarding as a thing that we do. We've moved to instead doing like code samples. You will implement a feature. You will do it. You'll do something that's closer to real world. We're not going to remove your access to Google and make you write down code on a whiteboard. That's not realistic. That's not how you would do your job. So instead, we want to see how you think about things. What would you Google? How do you, do you have the requisite context to break this problem down into things that you can search for to find the information that would let you solve it? Because that to me is a sign of a good developer, not whether or not you've memorized a bunch of code.
If I were to go on a job interview right now, which I'm not, no, really not, but I would definitely like make a place that was easy for prospective employers to find my work and just like 1 or 2 clicks be able to go and look at my code, go look at projects I've made, like make it very accessible for them to get to, because if it's not part of their hiring process, you want them to see this work. So it's stuff that you're putting your time into, make it easy for them to find it and to see it and make sure you get it to them. And then, like Jason said, there was a cakewalk. There's so many different resources out there that can like give you a bunch of problem examples. I know Cassidy Williams' newsletter, she has like interview questions in each newsletter, right?
And she breaks down the solution too. So like you can do it with a group, which I think is a great way to learn.
100%. And then also like, while you're like washing dishes or, doing something in your house, you can put on like all these free videos from conferences where they talk about newer breaking strategies and like most things that are like cutting edge to just like absorb the different things going around in the community, because not only are you hearing the jargon, but you're keeping abreast of all the new things going on. So those are 3 things that I would definitely keep in mind.
Absolutely. And I think that is a great place to wrap up, because we are unfortunately out of time. I feel like I could talk about this with you all day. So with that, I will say, Tara, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Thank you.
Where should people go if they want to follow up with you? I think Quincy dropped your Twitter.
So
maybe I can
I live on Winnicott Woods. Twitter, my DMs are open. I'm so bad at social media, but I'll get back eventually, but my DMs are open.
Good.
That's probably the best way besides coming to visit me. Terrace Park, Ohio.
Excellent. So thank you to freeCodeCamp for letting me take over the stream. This has been so much fun. I really enjoy everybody. Thank you to everybody in the chat who asked great questions. Keep in mind, we do these on Fridays, so we'll be back again next Friday with, I believe, April Spite is going to be on next week, which I'm super excited about. So
that's awesome.
Mark your calendars. Make sure that you go and get I think Quincy will post the article here shortly for everyone to go follow up. If you want to do more live coding, I run a live coding stream every week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's called Learn with Jason. It's on Twitch. Learnwithjason.dev is where the schedule is, where past episodes are, and you can come learn something with me in 90 minutes. And on that note, I think we're going to call this one in the can. Tara, thank you again. Chat, thank you again.